Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Hey there, Cammy.
Hey, Bryant, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And the not permanent guest, Peter. Peter, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
That's right, everyone. It's a Podicus Magnus. So each week, Mythstorie will give you stories and tales from famous legends and epics, and then talk about some of the history behind it. And every other Friday, we bring Peter along to just basically have him do the whole show for us so we can sit back and relax a little bit.
Get on my back, guys. I'll just carry you through this.
Right, yeah. So we are going into a nice subject today because we recently did an episode on 300. Cammy and I did a normal episode. This episode goes very well with that. Today we are talking specifically about the Battle of Marathon, or Marathon, as my Greek-loving girlfriend kept saying to me. So we're talking about the Battle of Marathon, and we're also going to have a little discussion about the Olympics. And sort of what it meant to the ancient Greeks a little bit, little Olympics 101, and then sort of the connection between marathon and the Olympics, which I thought there was a much greater connection. And there's a strong connection, but anyway, we'll go into that a little bit. Yeah, are we ready to get there, guys?
Absolutely.
Well, Peter, please take us away.
All right. Well, I'll be starting off this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about my sources first because I don't want to put that at the end. I want to be able to transition right into Cammy's story. It's a two-parter, so stay tuned. My sources, of course, were Wikipedia and Finding Dulcinea. They were like my jumping-off points, which led me to some primary sources, primarily Book 6 of Herodotus's Histories. I've become addicted to the excellent lecture series from Gillian Shepherd from La Trobe University in Australia. Her lectures are available like wherever you get your podcasts. She's awesome. An article from Saeed Adil from Five Guy Facts, which did a really good job of connecting modern sport to this kind of mythical marathon run. And something kind of on the side, if you find this kind of stuff interesting, there's a really fun new anime called Extra Olympia Kyklos, which is very funny, and it does a really good job of connecting the ideas of modern sports with sports of the ancient world. Really cool. All right, here we go. It is the year 490 BC, 10 years before the brave Leonidas and his 300 Spartans defended the pass of Thermopylae from Xerxes and his massive Persian army. Xerxes' father Darius I now sits on the Persian throne, and under his leadership, the Achaemenid Empire has grown into the largest empire the world has ever known. From their capital in Persepolis, the Persians have extended their influence east into what is now India, south as far as Egypt, and west into Ionia, which is modern-day Turkey. But Greek power is also on the rise. Greek at this time is a diverse collection of city-states situated on a rather unique geography. Its many peninsulas and islands reach out into the Aegean Sea like a giant arm, scattering its people and cultures along the western coast of Ionia. And revolution is brewing in Ionia. Cities have begun rising up against their Persian governors, and they have been supported at times by Greek troops sent by Athens and Eritrea. Darius sends his ambassadors to the Greek states, demanding their submission, and most of the Greeks agree to surrender, except, of course, our friends in Athens and Sparta, who publicly execute the ambassadors. Upon receiving the news, Darius shoots an arrow into the heavens and beseeches Zeus to bring destruction to the Athenians. He orders his servants to remind him 3 times a day before dinner, "Your Highness, remember the Athenians." So a big grudge is growing here. Darius begins amassing his armies with the aim of crushing the revolutions in Ionia and subduing those troublesome Greeks. Rather than bridging the Hellespont and marching their troops over land, as Xerxes did, the Persians set out with a large amphibious invasion force. After laying siege to Eritrea and burning it to the ground, the Persians set their sights on Athens. On a hot summer day, the Persian fleet moors in the Bay of Marathon, as they unload their troops, the Athenian army swiftly marches the 25 miles north to meet their foes on the plain of Marathon. Two narrow valleys converge to form the plain, and the Athenian general Miltiades, dang it,
Good job.
positions his troops to seal off those two exits from the battlefield. He makes his camp near the shrine of Heracles, hoping the demigod will aid them in battle. Unable to maneuver, the sea at their backs, the Persian generals Datis and Artaphernes must wait. Their deadly cavalry is still on the ships. The Athenian army is outnumbered nearly 3-1. In some accounts, it was much more outnumbered. Their heavily armored phalanx of hoplite infantry is formidable, but if they become surrounded, the Persian cavalry will cut them to pieces. Desperately needing reinforcements, Miltiades, one of these days we'll get it, sends his swiftest runner, Philippides, to Sparta to request support. Philippides begins the 140-mile journey under the burning summer heat. He crosses uneven terrain, rarely resting, and only eating and drinking as much as he can carry. While surmounting Mount Parnithian, he encounters Pan, god of the wild and of shepherds and flocks. The god demands to know why the Athenians do not honor him with temples. Philippides assures the god that the Athenians will make great offerings to him if he aids them in the coming battle. Finally, Philippides reaches Sparta in just 2 days, only to discover that the city is in the middle of the religious festival of Carnea. The warriors are all draped with garlands, and a great ram is to be sacrificed. The Spartans refuse to fight until the full moon, which is another 6 days away. Undeterred, Philippides swiftly makes the 140-mile journey back to Marathon and gives his reports to General Miltiades. The two armies have now been facing each other for 5 days, and the two opposing generals are growing impatient. Datis knows that the Spartans are coming, but he does not know that they have been delayed. Miltiades fears that the Persians might re-embark their cavalry and send their navy down to attack Athens directly while the armies are in a stalemate. Finally, one morning at dawn, Miltiades receives favorable omens from the gods and moves his troops into position to attack. He masses his troops on his wings and keeps his center weak, hoping to prevent the Persian cavalry from encircling them. Miltiades marches his troops right up to within range of the Persian archers and then orders his men to charge forward. As they advance, the Persian infantry, with their light bows and wicker shields, prove no match for the heavily armored and long-speared hoplites. Like a great vice, the Athenian flanks close in and crush the Persian lines. The god Pan, inspired by the run of Philippides, sends the retreating Persians into a panic. Their disorderly withdrawal leaves units scattered throughout the battlefield and make for easy prey for the Athenian infantry. Many Persians become lost in the confusion and drown in the swamps that border the battlefield. Many troops report seeing gods joining them in battle. The ghost of Theseus, historic founder of Athens, is seen entering the fray. Heracles and Athena herself lend their strength to the Athenian cause, and a previously unseen god, Echecleus, strikes down many Persians while wielding a great weaponized plow. The god of I love this character. This god of agriculture has surely appeared to defend the great agricultural stores that lie beyond the plain of Marathon in Attica. The Greeks successfully drive the Persians back onto their ships. By the end of the battle, nearly a third of the invading army has been captured or killed. The Athenians have only lost a few hundred men. But there is no time to celebrate. Miltiades knows that there is no greater threat than a wounded animal. More heroic deeds will be required to achieve total victory.
Nice. That was a very good description of that whole event.
Thanks. I saw you nodding. It made me
happy. I had like a reminder. I just wanted to add real fast. Just to kind of point in, the hoplites that the spears that they had,
mm-hmm.
they were huge. They were like really, 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 really long, like
mm-hmm.
20 plus feet long. So just a heads up. So it's when you've got a bunch of like Persian farmers coming to run in, and you've got like these buff Athenian and Spartan dudes with literal just, I mean, they're just huge. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about.
And it's incredible too, because they line up in line. So you've got guys out front with their spears out. You've got guys behind them with their spears like at an angle. So like anybody trying to get over or around is just going to it's like a giant porcupine.
Yep.
And the Persians had this massive army. It was very diverse. It was drawn from all their territories. So a very diverse army, but I think they were used to just overwhelming people with their numbers, but their equipment wasn't very good.
Yeah. Well, Cammy, can you roll this up for us? Conclude this wonderful story?
Absolutely. My sources are Wikipedia and also the real Phidippides story by Dean Karnassus. Phidippides knew he would make the long journey to Athens to tell of victory. It must be him. He was the swiftest of the elite branch of soldiers tasked with running ahead of the forces, and the only one who wouldn't stop until he reached his destination. The long run had taken its toll on his body. His calves tight, his skin chafed. He rested for a short time and munched on dates and olives to gather energy while he planned his route. It was only 25 miles to Athens. He had just run more than 4 times that to Sparta and back. He would do it. He still had fire in him. He massaged his leg with the oil from the olives he was eating. It helped. His body could do it because his mind could. He inhaled deeply and looked to the heavens. The clouds above him seemed to urge him on his way. So he stood, his back to his fellow soldiers, and began his journey. He had good news to spread and a warning. He must make it to Athens. As he ran, he prayed to the trickster god Hermes for swift passage. The Persians, he thought, they are coming in ships, and Athens is none the wiser. I am faster than a ship. The only thing faster than me is time, and time is not my friend. I am faster than a ship. And so he ran. His hair matted to his face with sticky sweat that ran to his eyes. They burned. Again he prayed, this time to Nike. May she hear his words and answer his pleas for victory. The Athenians, he thought, must ready for war before the ships can reach them. They must meet the troops on land while their cavalry is absent. I am faster than a horse. The only thing faster than me is time, and time is not my friend. I am faster than a horse. And so he ran, his clothes soaked through, his breath heavy, his feet heavy as well. Again he prayed, this time to Athena. Let me save your city. Give my body the strength of a warrior to endure. I must endure. The Persians, he thought, they will destroy everything if they board those ships before Athens knows of their plan. They conquer through fear. I am faster than fear. The only thing faster than me is time, and time is on no man's side. I am faster than fear. He looks to the horizon and sees the giant statue of Athena. She has answered him. He will make it. He will outrun time. He will save the gleaming pride of Greece. He, draped in olive leaves and purple garments, will eat figs and drink wine and dance with the beautiful people there in celebration. He will dine, he will sleep, he will take a chariot home. When he reached the gates of the city, a crowd gathered to hear his story of victory against all odds and the coming danger. He was faster than a ship. He was faster than a horse. He was faster than fear. He was faster than time. But as he spoke the words, "Rejoice, we conquer," his heart was pained, his breath was ragged, his body was worn. He collapsed to the ground and moved no more. Yes, he was faster than a ship. Yes, he was faster than a horse. Yes, he was faster than fear. Yes, the only thing faster than him was time.
Oh,
that was beautiful.
Thanks.
And then yeah, that was really great.
Very poetic.
That's really cool. Yeah, I was looking too. So before, like, there's the run from Sparta to Marathon is crazy, and they actually do a Spartathlon that takes, like, I think the fastest guy who did it in 20 hours, but like 3 British RAF soldiers did it one did it out of the 3 that attempted, and he did it in like just under 30, I think.
It's insane.
So yeah. So yeah, this is really cool.
And they only run one way. I mean, like Philippides ran both ways. I mean, and then he did enough.
Yeah. No, that was crazy. I have to talk to, because I mentioned it in the last few episodes. I'm almost done with this book. It's like a history of Genghis Khan, and they talk about the military strategies of the Mongols. And one thing the Mongols did to keep like a huge line of communication open. This is like 13th century, so no newer ways to communicate. But they would have, of course, horsemen. So I'm wondering why they didn't have any horsemen for this guy. But then they also had like a relay station of arrows. So like, horse guy would ride a bunch, but then shoot an arrow really far. It would hit a station, and then they would just keep doing that. Why couldn't they have thought of this? Just saying. But then again, there's no awesome story about some Mongolian guy running and dying. So
right.
I guess that's how it works. Well, yeah. So Peter pretty much nailed it. We talked about it too in our 300 episode recently. But yeah, the Persians were huge. King Darius the First, he was actually a usurper too. I realized he seized the Persian throne, and so he had a lot going on. His empire wasn't super cohesive, but he was able to bring these troops together, and he did have a lot of power over the Ionians and that part. Like, think of modern day Turkey. So it's that land bridge to the Mediterranean, to the Greeks from like Iran, the heartland of the Persian Empire, or modern day Iran. So he's going over there. He wants to mess with them. The Ionians have been revolting because they're like, nah, dude. Then the Athenians are like, yes, dude, we'll help. Darius isn't cool with that, so he's ready to punish a little bit. And long story short, he doesn't make it. And then 12 years later, his son Xerxes goes and brings up the fight again, and that's what we cover in the 300 episode. So this is like a really good chain here. So and yeah, what we talked about, the victory was pretty much attributed to the Greek focus on technology, their trained soldiers. Yes, they had the numbers, but a lot of it was probably levies of undertrained soldiers and things like that just weren't couldn't heat up to that. So it's really cool. The Battle of Marathon, we have pretty much the same sources that you'd expect from ancient Greece. The prime one being Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian. He was our main source for when we talked about the 300 Spartans and their exploits. He's an extremely important figure that's written on a ton of these exploits. There's also several modern sculptures that were made. We know that they were in homage to the city-states coming together. Remember, at this point in the ancient Greek period, this wasn't there were lots of city-states. They would help each other, but they would be fighting. I mean, the Greeks or the Athenians and the Spartans would be are at each other's throats, would be at each other's throats after all this stuff. So it keeps going and going. And Herodotus was actually born during the battles of Thermopylae, during the Persian, near the end of the Greco-Persian Wars. So he really does have a firsthand account on all of this stuff too. But it's cool. The Battle of Marathon really has evolved, and we have these sources. We have archaeological evidence of the Greco-Persian Wars. We have the writings of these guys, but obviously, especially this final run that Phaiapides, or whatever his name was, because it might have been someone else, has totally taken on an idea of its own. It became so famous and just kept sort of growing. But it's really cool because, so this battle took around 492 BC, and the myths, Homer lived probably 800 to 1200 BC, and the myths of Zeus, these Greek origin myths, precede that. So it's really cool to have this sort of injected myth, and these soldiers talking about seeing all these gods in the battle. And I really like that. Yeah, I totally saw him there. Did you see him there? He was totally killing people. Yeah, I saw him. I didn't. Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of Troy and the Iliad and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I really that stuff all came later too. Like Herodotus was probably talking to veterans who were actually there. So there's he was not born during marathon, but when he
Right.
was writing, there were probably still people who had, veterans of that battle. So we have kind of his kind of dryness, but then, to kind of elevate the story and elevate the glory of Athens, like the story, particularly of the second run, the run that Cammy was talking about, is much more romanticized, much more tied in with like, the gods helping. So we have this really kind of dry historical, like Herodotus doesn't mention the gods helping at all, but that comes later. And a lot of the artwork that survives of the Battle of Marathon shows these gods helping. But
yeah, it's cool. I like too, like Pan got injected in this, and Nike, or Nikkei, owing to the term panic, as freaking out the Persian army, things like that. And it seemed really like closely tied to Athens as this martyr. But yeah, why would he die if he's like a professional runner too? I don't know. So the connection to, like I said, when we started looking at a marathon, for some reason I thought that marathon, that specific, marathon's a place, but I thought it always had a connection to the Olympics. And of course there was running in the Olympics, the ancient Olympics and things like that, but the connection kind of came later.
Much later.
Right. And so of course the idea of running a marathon comes from this specific, you cover the distance, the 26 miles. The fixed distance between, to run 2 marathon that this Pheidippides made before he collapsed. And it wasn't so a quick history on the Olympics too, because it had been going on before this. We know for certain that it happened. It's around 776 for sure, but they speculate it might have been 884 or 1253 BCE, as early or as late as that, I should say. I mean, but we definitely have evidence of it happening in 776, and then it stopped in 394 during the Christianization of the Roman Empire. They ceased this because it was for Zeus. It was to honor Zeus. The Olympics totally were. But so once it ended, or 394 AD is what I think it was.
Right, it would have had to have been because of
you
said Christianity. Yeah.
Thank you. And it wasn't until literally the 18th century that it started coming back. So archaeologists were modern archaeology was able to take a look at these places, bring it up, and we started having people get interested in reviving the Olympics. Mainly there was the French, like I guess you could say like aristocrat kind of, Pierre de Coubertin. He is credited with being the founder of the modern Olympics, and with the help of the suggestion of Michel Braille, who wanted to do the marathon race. He was really he really liked the idea, the story of marathon. You kind of think of like a second Renaissance again. We're having sort of modern Western civilization is getting its hand on the ancient Greek stuff more and more, are excavating the old stadium in Olympus and things like that. So there's this huge thing. The world is the mid-ish, like 1860s. So the world's globalizing increasingly thanks to the Industrial Revolution. And so they tried. It actually failed at first. It didn't go so well. But then again, it worked out just before the end of the 19th century. They were able to sort of bring it back. And the marathon race was one of the famous events. Fun fact, too, a handful of Bostonians were there in that time. They go back home and they're like, let's do it ourselves. And then that's how you get the Boston Marathon. So kind of a crazy connection there. But yeah, so there's this really, that's sort of the evolution of marathon, the tale of marathon. It essentially helped spark the revival of the Olympics. This ancient historical battle during the Greco-Persian Wars happens. There's this dude who may or may have not have died. I mean, we have plenty of sources that talk about him. Again, he's credited with being named either Phidippides, Phaedipides. Even there's a couple other names that are Thursippus, Urkius, or Euclides. So there's different sources based off of Plutarch, Heraclides, Ponticus, all different Greek, Roman, ancient historians. They have these connections to it, but they're really not certain. But there is this idea of a runner either giving good news, saying like that's my favorite one, is he's just like, "Hooray, it's over," or he's giving a warning. And I think
that reminds me of John Henry so much.
Yeah. The American legend John Henry. That was an episode we did. Yeah. It's just totally like
he worked so hard, he broke his heart.
Right.
Yeah.
Why did you die? Like, stop dying. There's no need for this, really.
The story has to end somehow.
But it makes it so legendary. It adds a little bit of tragedy and sacrifice. It's great.
Yeah, we wouldn't have remembered Phidippides just running 26.2 miles if
just thumb up. Just like, all good, and then goes home, has some olives.
Philippides out. Bye.
Yeah. That's the funny thing too. So it's kind of crazy. I mean, I mentioned the Mongols having the sophisticated system, so that way you don't remember them. And then there's Paul Revere. That's a really famous one that sort of happens. Again, why couldn't they just give Phoebes a horse? I don't know. But yeah, so there's a really wild connection here of the Greco-Persian Wars, the Battle of Marathon, the runner going to Marathon, and then essentially sparking the revival. Now, the revival may have happened regardless, just because of like Pierre de Coubertin, he funding these excavations, looking through everything, and this idea of wanting to bring it. But even modern Greece during the 19th century was totally down with not only bringing the games back, but bringing in a marathon to it. A last ended up looking into someone who is called, sort of just for name, Dactyl Heracles. So we all know Heracles is the Greek name for Hercules, and there is something called dactyls in ancient Greece, and there's a few meanings here. A dactyl is like a unit of measurement, apparently, in ancient Greece. I didn't look too much into this, but that's just sort of the blurb. But the dactyls were also an ancient race, like a mythical race of men, just buff guys. I don't know. They're essentially demigods. So Dactyl Heracles is actually credited with essentially being a founder of the Olympic Games. He and his he had four other like brothers, essentially, were famed with racing in armor, which was one of the oldest Olympic Games. So let's see, like the Courettes. Yeah, so the Dactyls, they to praise Zeus for wrestling his dad Kronos. He wrestled Papa Kronos, and they were like, "Great job, you wrestled with time. So we're gonna run in our armor for you." And from that, essentially, the Olympic Games were born. And what's interesting is Herodotus. Hold on, is it Herodotus or so? Actually, a few. So Strabo, Pausanias. Again, different Greek, going up into like the 2nd and 4th century AD, starting around the time of Herodotus. It's mentioned this Heracles or Hercules that founded the Olympics, and they even in this time period mentioned the confusion, because I was really confused. I actually even Googled like who is the god of Greek sport, and Hercules comes up, but it isn't necessarily Hercules or Heracles, but it also is. Some ancient states did correlate Hercules being Hercules. Now, again, the Hercules, both of these Hercules would have been ancient, and so, but some states distinctly divide them, like the Hercules that we know of, the son of Zeus, and what is Achaemenon, the farmer. But again, it's kind of funny because they're both sons of Zeus. These two Heracles or Hercules, both sons of Zeus. So it's extremely confusing. But essentially, there's two important demigod Hercules. One is credited with being a Disney movie, and then the other is credited, among other things, and the other is credited with founding the Olympics. And in some cases, the records, the sources, the ancient texts show that they're one and the same, and that one kind of evolved into it in the future. So, yeah, I was really surprised by that. I thought that was really interesting.
He may have been based on a real person, like from the Dactyl tribe or the Dactyl people.
I don't. That's super. We're going pre-12th century BCE.
Oh,
I think with that stuff. Yeah, that's so like it's as old as it's old. Like it's very old myth, and it's just kind of funny. I think because of the confusion of the names and the importance of Hercules and Heracles, I think that it just sort of like, especially in modern Greek discussion, dropped off. So I think they just said no, like. Just talk about Hercules of the 12 labors. Don't talk about this other guy. And again, because some ancient sources would even note that they worship the what is it called? The dactyl Heracles as the real Heracles, and that's a mistake or something like that. But it's super confusing, and it really is. There's an Olympic like .org website that I came across. That even it mentions, it kind of gives you like Greek myth 101 connection to it, like Zeus and stuff like that. It doesn't even mention any form of Hercules or Heracles. And I think it's just to avoid the confusion.
Just to simplify it.
Especially for us today, it's really easy to know the basics of Greek myth just from pop culture and just generalization. But that it just brings in a nice confusing little bit to it. I mean, I was really kind of confused for a little while until I finally was able to understand. I looked at those sources actually referencing it then in the 2nd century AD. People were like, no, there's 2 Heracles. These guys think they're dumbasses. They don't know what they're talking about. So
I do find it really interesting how we have like the marathon as an organized run is a fairly modern sporting event based on this historical mythological story.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, a lot of the Olympic events, a lot of like high school track and field events can be traced back to these ancient Olympic games, like the discus, the javelin, running, wrestling. A lot of this was, these are sports that have been fairly organized for thousands of years. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. And the Olympics have really evolved over time, and I imagine there were like localized events too. So even when the Olympics didn't kind of go on, I mean, competition is a great way to do, to live. It's a super essential part of humanity, and so yeah, it's cool. So it's really wild to see that evolution. Another big thing I found during my research, I mean, when you look up, like, if you just, my rudimentary stuff was Greek mythology and sports, or mythology and sports. There's a modern idea of there's a huge pool of discussion regarding just how huge sports. I mean, they're monstrously huge today. Like Michael Jordan, there was an article on Michael Jordan that popped up even, and I scrolled through it quickly. I mean, he's got it. He like, if 10,000 years from now, when our ruins are being excavated, they're going to find an ancient statue of Hercules and an ancient statue of Michael Jordan, and they're going to be like, these dudes were around the same time, obviously.
Well, I've got an interesting idea about that.
Yeah.
So originally Olympic Games were to honor Zeus. I mean, there was a massive ivory and gold statue of Zeus in Olympia. So this is all about celebrating Zeus. And you look at today, like, what are sports for? Like, who are we glorifying? We're really kind of glorifying the athletes. Like they've become like the gods, essentially. Like, your Michael Jordans, your Tom Brady's, they're like these larger than life celebrated figures, and extremely powerful people too.
Right. I look at with Kobe Bryant's passing. That has been,
that was a cultural moment.
It was like losing a god in ancient Greece, like finding out a god had died somehow. So yeah, it's really cool. I even found, I read like the abstract of it. I found this, like, I have it actually here, an academic article called "Sport as a Myth" by Klimov Mikhail Yurovich, and it is way above me. It's very intense. It's really cool though. So, but yeah, there is a really cool connection there that goes a meta connection that goes beyond things regarding looking at how sports affect things, how they change everything, the meanings that we put behind them. And again, this battle of marathon, the run specifically is almost more important than the actual battle itself, in as far as like the story going and its legacy. And again, we can trace that story of marathon, the run, to the late 19th century and the revival of the Olympic Games, which were shut down for over 1,000 years because of this. So yeah, that's the craziness that we have for you today. I think that pretty much covers me. I'll give you guys my sources too before I forget. My favorite source I'll start with first is theoi.com, theoi.com. They had really awesome primary sources. That was the one source that was able to really like break down Dactylos, Heracles, or Heracles, Dactylos. That really helped me out. It also showed me like it labels who says what in the ancient text and things like that. I, of course, used Britannica and Wikipedia as well, but also history.com and eyewitnesstohistory.com gave me a little 101 on the Battle of Marathon and things like that. Oh, and I'll one more thing that I wanted to mention. I meant to mention it earlier is we talked in the 300 episode. We essentially talked about how Herodotus is the source for the 300 Spartans. That's it. That's kind of it. And then I was thinking to myself, well, how do I trust Herodotus? How do we do that? And I was looking on Reddit. There's a really good subreddit called Ask Historians. It's very professional. It's not like, it's very well moderated, and real historians back up their stuff there. And I found this great thing by a user named Legal Action. He has this great post that talks about textual criticism. And in a nutshell, it's just basically, it's about you trace where these manuscripts and primary documents came from, or secondary sources. You just boil things down, you corroborate, you take everything with a grain of salt too, in a way. But of course, having multiple sources that are independent of each other is really helpful. And, in these cases of the Greco-Persian Wars, we do have the writings of a handful of historians. We do have monuments that listed these things. I can't remember what it's called, but there's the Battle of Thermopylae. They made a three-headed snake statue that wrote down city-states and how many soldiers that they gave to the battle. So there are these things that we have to corroborate, because it's hard to verify these things. And how do we know, was this Herodotus's work? No, it was Herodotus's, and then someone copied it, and someone translated it to Arabic, and then it got lost, and then some Greek dude found it in 1000 AD Byzantium, and he translated it again, and then it got translated to French. So but you track that stuff, you do your best to boil that down, so that way you have the context that explains everything. So I'll post a link to this thread, because it's really cool. There's a lot here, but textual criticism and historicity in general is another concept of how history is written that are really important regarding these things. So take in the facts, but you just have to be aware of everything surrounding them. That's the important part, and that's what the historians really do. They focus on, and then we take that and then we talk about it on our podcast.
Make all these connections.
Yeah, that's it.
It's fantastic.
Well, Cammy and Peter, thanks so much. That was really great. Does anyone have anything to add?
Actually, yeah, I wanted to get some of the sort of housekeeping stuff out of the way towards the end. We did hit 198 in the US history charts for podcasts. So that's really big.
Yeah.
We also were 44 in Poland. So hello to our Polish listeners.
Thank you,
and
Poland.
We were 84 in New Zealand for history podcasts. So thank you, New Zealand. And specifically Zena.
Yeah. To say hello in Polish, it's Dzień dobry. So
Dzień dobry.
Sinjobri, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, we have had some awesome growth lately. We had that good experience of the pod VCon. We mentioned this a little bit when we listed Cammy's episode where she was in a women in podcasting panel. It was really cool. Check it out. And we really appreciate all the new followers and listeners. Remember, we are on Facebook. That's probably one of the best ways to kind of join us, our Facebook group. But we're also on Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, technically, too. I need to do some more with that. But we also post these episodes as videos now, as our wonderful Skype calls. So check out our YouTube channel. Remember, it's Mythstorie with an IE. It's all one word, but Mythstorie with an IE instead of a Y. Yeah, I think that covers it, right? Did I miss anything?
No, I think we're good. I do want to thank, I'd like to thank Tina from the Psychedelic Podcast and Alex from That Strange as well. They've been super, super supportive. So
yes. Yeah, our podcast friends have been very helpful the last couple weeks. So, well, okay, Peter, Cammy, excellent work today. A+. I'll let you guys come back in a couple weeks. How about that?
Yay.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Well, thanks so much again. And everyone, thank you for listening. We will see you all next time.
Nikkei.